Part 26. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 257. After walking out of the building and standing in the square in the middle of the open area, Subai looked up at the sky. It didn't look like there was going to be a thunderstorm soon. It might have been influenced by the many science fiction doomsday movies he had watched before. Subai always subconsciously, he believed that if God destroyed the world, he would use a very exaggerated and large-scale method to directly wipe out everything. But Subai knew one thing better, that is, although in this story world, the horror broadcast in the mission introduction, the conceptual terms God and Noah's Ark in the Bible were used. However, in this story world, the audience knows that there is no God. Even if God does appear in mid-air, it cannot be said that God appears, because in the story world, there is only one God, and that is broadcasting. Radio can arbitrarily borrow the image of any God to do things, just to make its story richer. Therefore, if a listener is a Christian, he will not foolishly think that he is a Christian so he can. What kind of benefits do you get here? If we think in terms of the aesthetics of horror broadcasting, the direct use of lightning or fireballs or even meteorite impacts seems a bit lacking. It is too cliché and is not the style of horror broadcasting. Suddenly, Subai felt a sense of expectation in his heart. Looking forward to what method the terrorist broadcast would use to destroy the city? It feels strange to step out, have nothing to do, no tasks, feel very free, and wait for death leisurely. There was an empty square inside Wanda, with a mid-range clothing store on the ground floor. Subai planned to go in and choose a set of clothes, but when he just walked past a cafe, he suddenly stopped. You did it on purpose. Pilo looked at the old man and pointed at the old man's toes. Just now, when the young man walked past his table in the outdoor cafe, the old man's toes slightly the ground trembled, and an energy wave appeared, disrupting the simple barrier set up by Pili Tower, causing the young man to sense an abnormality. Piaolu stretched out gracefully and faced the old man with a sarcastic smile. First, I deliberately helped that guy open up his body's energy and blood, get rid of the bruises left by the various enhancements before, and also gave him some advice. This time I actually wanted to attract his attention. Yan Huiyang, if I hadn't known that your actual age is less than 30, I might have thought that this guy was your illegitimate son. Otherwise, I really can't figure out why you would deliberately be so nice to him. Not our style of dealing with each other as listeners. The old man closed his eyes and said nothing, as if what just happened had nothing to do with him. Immediately, Piaolu blinked in surprise, with a solemn look in his eyes. He actually felt that Yan Huiyang's state of mind was actually several points more refined than before. Could it be that he and Lan Lin had teamed up to severely injure him before? What did this series of experiences make him realize? Damn it, will you do this on purpose next time? Find someone to maim yourself or self-mutilate yourself after entering the story world. A person whose misophobia is many times worse than myself can now calmly behave like a bad old man, and the change in his mood is certain. With a little taste and a little amusement at the same time, Pila pointed at Subai, who was only half a meter away from him. So what if he senses it? Although this is just a barrier I set up at will, it is not something that a listener who has not even fused his own weapon can break through easily, unless he is strengthened by an array mage. Of course, it doesn't look like him. Yan Huiyang yawned at this time, dug his little finger into his ear, and then blew on his mouth. His behavior was extremely vulgar, but he was very comfortable. As if he didn't hear what Piaolu said, he stretched out his hand. He loosened his hair again. Pilo, believe it or not, when this story world ends and I recover, I will go into seclusion. The next time I see you, I can beat you so hard that your mother won't even recognize you, even if you meet Lan Lin next time. If we join forces, I won't panic anymore. Pili frowned slightly, then nodded. Well, I do believe that at our level, every step forward means a gap-like distance. Now I just regret it. It seems that I should have paid a little more to give you to you completely killed. You think too much, and Lan Lin is reluctant to kill me. Beating me like that is the limit that Lan Lin will accept. You really feel good about yourself. This has never changed. Piaolu smiled and tapped his fingers lightly on the table. You can't figure out Lan Lin's character. She cultivates its Taoism, and it's not an authentic section. I even think that Lan Lin may become more and more extreme in the future. Even if one day, she finds an opportunity to kill both of us and refine it, I won't be surprised. Alas, it is no longer the small team that entered the story world together. You're the only one who's so bad-tempered that you're still here being sentimental. The old man rolled his eyes at Piaolu, then clapped his hands. Look, he's here. Energy fluctuations. Very weak. It was like there was a layer of membrane between them, but Subai still felt it. Looking around, Subai didn't see any monsters or special items, and he didn't feel that there were any nearby listeners observing him, because there was no need or motive. Those who were able to stay in the city without boarding the ship must have been screwed up. Do you still want to go out and eat black things at this time? Subai turned around and looked at the empty table beside him. He's looking at you, Yan Huiyang said. He can't see anything. Piaolu touched his chin very confidently. My barrier is probably broken even by you. You are a guy who can only use brute force. Not necessarily. When a certain force reaches a certain level, quantitative changes will lead to qualitative changes. Tell me, what is the purpose of attracting him? I'm really curious. The old man opened his palm, revealing the team crystal, and waved it gently in front of Piaolu. TCH, do you think it's possible? Piaolu snorted disdainfully, let such a low-level listener join our team. What blessings he has created in his previous life. This man is a bit interesting. He is both good and evil, crazy and crazy. He is a very interesting person. When I was in the belly of a pregnant woman, he actually took the initiative to send the pregnant woman to the hospital. To be honest, this move made me. I was very touched. Probably, my state of mind really started to change at that time, and he was an opportunity. You mean, if we are in the same team as him, Lan Lin and I can also obtain this kind of energy? Yan Huiyang, are you not crazy? This is fate and cause and effect. Yan Huiyang rubbed his finger on the tip of his nose. Terrorist broadcasts have always followed the policy of cause and effect. You will not fail to understand it. Cause and effect? I believe that your state of mind has improved a lot, but I will never believe that you have touched the level of cause and effect, otherwise you should go to that place. Okay, let's do this. If you don't take action, if he can break this barrier, I will give him a chance to join the team, but the three of us must vote. Okay, if I don't move, you are not allowed to move either. The old man agreed directly. Sure, I won't move. In fact, it's useless to give him a chance. I don't agree, but you agree. Lan Lin, she has set her sights higher than her head now. I guess in her heart, it's really worth her recognition. It's just Lychee, and no one else, including you and me, can fall into her eyes, let alone a guy who hasn't even fused his natal magic weapon. Yan Huiyang coughed, and then said, 1, 2, 3, wooden man. Piaolu was just about to laugh at Yan Huiyang's childishness, but after thinking about it, he really didn't say anything and stopped moving. He just bit his fingers with one hand and sat on the wicker chair with the mentality of watching a play, motionless. He didn't believe that a stupid young man could break his barrier. It was really ridiculous. Yan Huiyang didn't move. He crossed his arms and looked very indifferent. If this was cause and effect, Yan Huiyang had already done what he should do. There was cause and effect. If he had set the cause, there would be no results. If so, then this period of cause and effect will be dispersed. If it is dispersed, then it will be dispersed. Subai stood at the outdoor coffee table, staring, but couldn't see anything. He stretched out his hand to touch, but couldn't touch anything, but there was always a feeling of thorns in his back. The previous induction refused to be wrong, and now his feeling it was becoming clearer and clearer, but there was indeed nothing in front of me. Is it really that I am a little too sensitive now? Sudbai's eyes narrowed slightly. He suddenly thought of formations. Fatty was a descendant of Taoism and was good at setting up formations. However, Sudbai was just a vampire and a zombie. He really didn't know anything about formations. However, he had the skills from Fen Yelong. Jade ruler. At this time, he took out the jade ruler and shook it, but he didn't know how to use it at all. Fen Yelong's jade ruler and the formation book were chosen by Sudbai to trade with the fat man after returning to the real world. Use it yourself. While shaking the jade ruler, Sudbai turned around and then stopped moving. He was thinking deeply. He was wondering if he was really neurotic. There is really no inevitable connection between mental illness and neurosis. Seeing Sudbai take out a low-level jade ruler magic weapon for setting up formations, the smile on Piaolu's face deepened. A layman holding the formation magic weapon could only use it as a fire stick. So funny. However, soon, Piaolu stopped smiling, and his whole face froze. Because Sudbai turned around and stopped moving, deep in thought, but he happened to be standing in front of the chair where Piaolu was sitting. Sudbai is standing and Piaolu is sitting. The height and angle are perfect. Piaolu's mouth happened to be in perfect contact with Sudbai's lower body, especially since Piaolu still maintained the posture of a wooden man biting one of his fingernails and not moving. It was more like he was sitting there giving Sudbai a blowjob, especially when from the perspective of Yan Huiyang on the opposite side, the image is even more lifelike. The whole picture is so lewd and slutty that people can't bear to look at it. Grass. Piaolu couldn't bear it any longer. He waved his hand and the barrier spread. Sudbai was hit by a flying force and he quickly retreated. Yan Huiyang laughed and stood up. With one arm raised, he directly helped Sudbai dispel the force and let Sudbai stand firm beside him. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 258. Piaolu's face was a little gloomy, and he covered his mouth with one hand. He was a misophobic person, and he really couldn't stand the scene just now. Of course, this kind of misophobia is also adapted to local conditions. For example, in times of danger, his endurance is naturally strong, just like Mr. So can eat anything in critical moments in the story world, but on weekdays, if conditions permit, he can eat anything. We'll try to improve their living standards as much as possible. Yan Huiyang was quite happy. Everyone knew the word cause and effect, and everyone understood it, but most people didn't understand it, and most people didn't understand it. The integration of the natal weapon into one's own body is only the first stage of demarcation of strength, but if one can understand the word cause and effect, it will be a whole other world. After reaching that state, it is said that terrorist broadcasts will also lose control of themselves. For example, it is said that Lizzie destroyed a British city by himself, but survived safely in the end. This is like a cake, an attractive cake. The listeners of horror broadcasts are equivalent to toys and dolls, things that can be played with at will. But the listeners are not beasts. They are people with self-esteem and pursuits. They have been treated like this all the time. No normal person would be willing to be a doll, not to mention that these people's strength is considered to be a legendary god existence in the real world. How can they continue to be willing to endure being reduced to playthings in horror broadcasts? Lychee destroyed a city in England, but finally left safely, which is equivalent to setting a benchmark full of temptation and temptation for all subsequent listeners. In this story world, Yan Huiyang is in a deep state of mind, so in order to go further, he really begins to figure out cause and effect. Now that the line of cause and effect can be confirmed by Sudbai, it is a great game for Yan Huiyang. Big opportunity. Therefore, in this world, there is no love without reason, and there is no hatred without reason. The first time Yan Huiyang helped Subai to open up the congestion point in the body, it was only because Subai took the initiative to send the pregnant woman to the hospital that he seems to be pleasing to the eye, that's all. But this time, it's not as simple as being pleasing to the eye or not. He also has a conspiracy, but this conspiracy is now considered beneficial to Subai. You lost. Yan Huiyang looked at Pailalu. Pailalu's expression finally returned to normal, and he looked at Subai. Don't worry, I'll see how you pass Lan Lin's test. Yan Huiyang pretended to be reserved and nodded, with a feeling in his eyes that he had everything under control, as if the Piao tower in front of him was no longer on the same level as him. Pailu, Yan Huiyang, and Lan Lin were all in the same batch of horror broadcasters, and their relationship was good from the beginning, similar to the relationship between Subai and Fatty Monk. You pretend, you keep pretending. Pailalu didn't believe that his old friend and enemy would suddenly advance to such a point. Then, Pailalu saw a woman walking slowly among the crowd. Wearing a black dress, she looks very restrained, but gives people a very noble temperament. Lychee is one of the top people among the audience. In addition, she has an arrogant personality and her methods are very intimidating. Therefore, except for the shameless Fatty, she can go over and help Lychee do some errands to gain favor. Not many people can really have real contact with Lychee, and Lan Lin is a special one. It is said that the two women have a good relationship, and Lan Lin even calls Lychee her sister. When Yan Huiyang saw Lan Lin coming, he was a little embarrassed for a moment. Obviously, he really didn't have confidence that Lan Lin would agree. All the previous expressions were indeed fake. Now he looks older and his mentality has changed. A tendency to become an old naughty boy. Pailu took the initiative to greet him. Here he comes. Lan Lin nodded without even looking at Subai. Subai, who was standing aside, felt a thump in her heart. Damn it, if it was such a coincidence, I could meet a big boss even if I had to die. Yan Huiyang's brain probably hasn't recovered yet. He actually wants to recruit a rookie who hasn't even integrated his own weapon into his body. It really makes me speechless. Then join. Lan Lin replied simply, and then sat down at the coffee table. She wore a green ring on her ring finger. It was crystal clear. If you look closely, it seemed to have a ghost face imprinted in it. Piao Tower. Yan Huiyang. Lan Lin was a little surprised and looked at her two old friends standing there with disbelief on their faces. She stretched out her hand to comb the hair around her earlobes and said, "You have all the team crystals. Let's form a team first. I probably know how Terror Broadcast plans to destroy the world this time. If you don't want to miss the wonderful scene at the beginning, don't waste time." Lan Lin sat elegantly on the armchair. Her whole body looked as beautiful as water, a bit like Fan Bingbing on the screen. Of course, it might be a bit too blasphemous to compare an actress in the real world with her. Lan Lin. Cause and effect, there is a cause, there is an effect, there is an effect, there is a cause. Yan Huiyang seemed to be suffering from a demonic disease. He kept talking about this while sitting in the car. Pei and Lan Lin were sitting in the back, and Yan Huiyang was sitting in the passenger seat. The driver was naturally Subai. Subai could see clearly at this time. Who would do this if he didn't do it himself? However, looking at the old guy next to him talking so arrogantly, people who don't know the truth might think he is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Okay, this is it. Turn the air conditioner down a little. Let's wait. It's about to start. After Lan Lin finished speaking, she leaned against the car window and closed her eyes as if taking a nap. No matter how strong a woman is, it's the same. Tasty, lazy, and also likes to sleep. Subai thought this in his heart. Pai Lu's face has always been a little depressed, and he kept kneading the Pai Shiu lying on his knees with his palms. Fortunately, Pai Shiu didn't have much hair on his body, mostly scales. If it were other pets, the hair would probably have been absorbed by Pililu unconsciously. Stripped naked. At the same time, Piaolu always glanced at Subai intentionally or unintentionally. Yan Huiyong seemed a little tired from muttering. He took out a bottle of mineral water from the car, opened it, drank it all in one breath, breathed a long sigh of relief, and threw the bottle out of the window. He really showed no sense of ethics. No. At this time, Lan Lin closed her eyes and said, "Old Yan, if you continue like this, you will become obsessed. Cause and effect must be a matter of course." Yan Huiyong frowned. Obviously, he didn't listen, but he couldn't say anything. Sister Lichi once told me that if you take the matter of cause and effect too seriously and forcefully follow a line of cause and effect, not only will you not be able to use this line of cause and effect to get a glimpse of the door of cause and effect, but it will actually trap yourself inside this causal line. Didn't you notice? The consequence of your obsession with this line is that you will continue to benefit the chef who drives the car. If you continue to develop, I am afraid that you will eventually become his stepping stone. Hearing this, Subai's breath froze. Yan Huiyong started stroking it gently with his fingers. Subai could feel that at that moment, Yan Huiyong had murderous intentions towards him. It is indeed difficult to have true friendship among the audience, especially when one's own vital interests or even one's own property and life are threatened. Obviously, if a person of Yan Huiyong's level is to become Subai's stepping stone in the future, Yan Huiyong it was absolutely impossible to accept it. Just now, he even had the idea of killing Subai to avoid future troubles, but he still held back. There may be reasons why he doesn't want to be led by Lan Lin, and there may also be reasons why he has completed the team rules and is restricted by the terrorist broadcast. The Pixio on Pilalu's legs suddenly became energetic at this moment. He recovered from being constantly needed by his owner and began to look out of the window. Lan Lin opened the car door at this time and got out. "Get out of the car. Now you can enjoy the world-destroying art of horror broadcasting." Yan Huiyong also got out of the car, and Pilo got out of the car with Pixio in his arms. Subai sat in Chaoshan for a while and then got out of the car as well. Ahead is a park where many people are walking or walking their dogs. At this moment, a wildcat emerged from the grass. The wildcat was dirty and had many red rashes on its body. It looked like it was sick. Immediately afterwards, a little girl let go of her mother's hand and came over. She knelt down and stroked the wildcat's head. The wildcat lay weakly in the little girl's arms. The girl's mother came over immediately and scolded the little girl not to touch the wildcat and wild dog. There were bacteria, so the little girl let go of the wildcat with some grievance. At this time, a red rash appeared on the palm of the little girl's hand. This infectious disease is very fast, Subai thought in his heart. But soon, dense red rashes began to appear on the little girl's body, and she fell directly to the ground. The girl's mother stood aside anxiously. Yan Huiyong, Lan Lin, and Piaolu were standing in the distance watching all this, and Subai was also standing aside. However, no one of these four people went to help, because they all understood that if this was the end of the world, in the words of the prologue, then, no one can stop it. The red rash on the little girl's body began to spread rapidly, and eventually her entire skin turned red, and her body began to grow cat faces and whiskers. The little girl's mother's expression also changed from anxious to greedy, and she also began to change automatically. The adult cat man then took the initiative to pounce on his daughter and began to tear and devour her daughter's body. Soon, the girl was cut into pieces and died. The girl's mother raised her head greedily and let out a cat meow, but her skin also began to turn red. Then, many people walking and exercising with their dogs in the park also began to he turned into a cat man, and then rushed towards the girl's mother like crazy. The girl's mother wanted to resist, but she couldn't resist at all. Her whole body was quickly torn, dismembered, and devoured. Red begins to spread. Seductive red. Crazy red. It started from one point, spread out, and gradually spread throughout the city. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 259. A catman who turns red will attract nearby humans to transform into catmen, and then come to devour him. However, a catman who turns red also has a primitive and almost instinctive attitude towards other catmen who turn red. Desire. Devour. Killing. Tear. Cut the body into pieces. Waiting for a series of extremely negative situations that are becoming the theme song of the city at this time. Lan Lin stood by the river, looking at the remains of severed fingers flowing in the river, as if admiring the scenery. Her mood did not seem to be affected in the slightest. In this scene, she seemed to be able to maintain her composure. My own purity. At least, that's what it looks like. If a normal person could take a photo with a camera at this time, the heroine in the photo and the environment around her would form a huge visual gap, condensing a suffocating and strange beauty. Perhaps Lan Lin was comprehending something at this time, and she was doing her best to keep herself alone in the world and not be affected by the city. It's just a practice, an inner practice. Pilo kept walking, and the cat people around him couldn't see him. In other words, at this time, there were no cat people who were not high enough to see through his deception. He was holding Paishiu, who at this time revealed the ferocity deep in his bloodline that could not be erased. He seemed very excited about the surrounding environment and the bloody things that were happening. Pei Lu simply put Paishiu on the ground, then took out a blue rope from his pocket, wrapped it around Paishiu's neck, and then started walking with Paishiu like a dog. The surrounding area was bloody, and there were constant tragedies of corpses being dismembered, but Pialo still held Pixiu leisurely and contentedly. Walk. 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 With a smile and spring flowers blooming. It was as if he was just in the midst of folk activities in a local city. Everything around him was so surprising and interesting. He took the dog and walked around, stopping and walking. Everything is leisurely and interesting. Yan Huiyang sat alone on the rooftop, holding a bottle of red wine in his hand. Below, there was a large massacre scene. Countless red cat people and non-red cat people turned the place into a hell on earth. Yan Huiyang watched for a while. After that, he took a sip of wine and drank it like a miserable person, enjoying himself very much. 3 wits, obstacles. Subai sat in the car, lit a cigarette, took a puff, and exhaled a hazy smoke ring. Maybe he had not reached the state of deliberately pursuing his heart, or maybe it was just his nature. Subai felt that this everything, I just felt disgusting. Of course, there was also a deep shock, a feeling that the blood and veins of the entire city were displayed in front of me. Originally, the mysterious and solemn city was now like a woman who was stripped of her clothes, tied to the cross, whipped and desecrated constantly, and her blood flowed out gurglingly. Turned into a deep black, a despairing black. Subai has killed many people, but the feeling that millions of people in a city are dying around him still makes it difficult for Subai to accept it calmly. Perhaps, whether it is Lan Lin, Piaolu or Yan Huiyang couldn't completely accept all this quietly, so he deliberately stayed to face it to sharpen his mind. Ah! A red cat man was pressed against Subai's car window by 2 cat men, and they began to eat in front of Subai. Subai shook the cigarette ashes outward and then closed the car window. Often a scene that could only be seen in zombie movies actually appeared in front of him, but Subai felt that it was not interesting at all. He was not overly excited, nor did he feel panicked or confused. He just felt a little nauseous and nauseated. After starting the car, Subai reversed the car and several cat people fell to the ground. Then Subai stepped on the accelerator and ran over them without mercy. Because they are no longer human, and they are destined to be destroyed. The car was covered in blood, which made Sudbai frown. He drove to a relatively empty place, got off the car, walked to a vending machine, punched the window and took a can of coffee from it. Thinking that Lan Lin's 3 people were still comprehending, Sudbai felt that these 3 guys were the real mental illnesses. What was there to comprehend about this kind of thing? It was a bit pretentious for the sake of hypocrisy. Meow. At this time, a cat meow came from behind Sudbai. Damn, come again, are you annoying? Sudbai turned around and very accurately grabbed the neck of a catman that had just jumped towards him. This was a female catman who was only about 7 or 8 years old, and the clothes on her body were basically torn. This was different from the full moon nights that Sudbai had experienced before. At that time, these cat people were relatively gentle. Except for becoming very ferocious when encountering living people, they were just like sleepwalking the rest of the time. Look at this cat people now, there was no redness on her body but it was already in tatters, and when she looked at Sudbai, there was a particularly terrifying ferocity in her eyes. How dare you glare at me? Sudbai was also amused for a while, and then threw the female catman to the ground. He didn't use much force, but his own aura was exuding. I have experienced a full moon night before. Cat people are not stupid. Even when they attack humans, they always attack humans. They are not stupid. They also have the instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. Moreover, cats are one of the animals besides humans. The more spiritual type. Meow. She seemed to be frightened by Sudbai's aura, and there were no other cats around to attack Sudbai with her, so she just circled around Sudbai. Sudbai lit another cigarette, looked at the catwoman surrounding him, and suddenly thought of Pu Yao Yao. It was indeed a pity that that woman died. This is probably the true meaning and rules of horror broadcasting: who lives and who dies. It is really possible that a capable and courageous woman like Pu Yao Yao is dead, while a person like Sudbai who often suffers from mental illness is still alive. There is really no certainty in all this. Catwoman was still looking at Sudbai and didn't dare to rush forward again. Sudbai just smoked his cigarette quietly. How long will those idiots keep watching? Sudbai sighed helplessly. At this time, not far away, a red catman was run towards here by 4 or 5 ordinary catmen. This red catman was bloody and scarred, and he was obviously seriously injured. At this stage, the red catman, the number is still small, but it is estimated that after waiting for another half day, the number of red cat people will increase. By then, it will no longer be ordinary cat people chasing red cat people, but red cat people and red cat people. Cat people fight among themselves, and it's hard to see ordinary cat people. The catwoman next to Sudbai also showed greed in her eyes. She looked at the red catman and her saliva was already dripping. At this time, the escaping red catman was knocked down, and several ordinary catmen began to eat his body. Gradually, 4 of the catmen turned red, and 1 catman remained unchanged. Sudbai nodded thoughtfully, guessing that 1 red cat person could only infect 4 ordinary cat people. The cat people who didn't turn red immediately pounced on their companions who turned red, and the others who turned red also started biting each other. Why don't you go up? Sudbai looked at Catwoman beside him. Catwoman glanced at it, and then looked over there, with a look of fear on her face. This look of fear actually suppressed her instinct to eat the red companion, which made Sudbai feel a little bit accident. Soon, the killing was over, and a larger red catman finally became the winner. His bones and skin became much harder and thicker, and his aura seemed to be 2 times stronger than before. 3 times. This kind of strengthening method is really enviable. Sudbai touched his chin, feeling a little envious. It would be great if his bloodline could be improved by devouring other listeners. The red catman glanced at Sudbai in front of him, then at the ordinary catwoman next to Sudbai, then turned around, apparently planning to find another red cat of the same kind to eat. At this moment, the Catwoman next to Subai let out a meow. This meow shows a lack of confidence. It's like saying a few words to someone you can't beat when they're about to leave. It's probably equivalent to having the ability to prevent me from meeting you next time. The red cat man suddenly stopped moving, turned around, looked at Catwoman, and then walked towards Catwoman. After swallowing the red kind, did my wisdom become higher? I actually gained my own sense of majesty. I felt that I was being provoked, so I started to prepare to fight back. Unfortunately, everything Subai saw and discovered in front of him could not be returned to the real world and written into popular science materials, even if it was indeed a first-hand fact report. Catwoman began to retreat, taking the initiative to retreat. Obviously she did not expect that the other party did not intend to eat her but still wanted to deal with her. When Catwoman retreated to Subai, Subai subconsciously stretched out his hand and placed it on Catwoman's head. Catwoman immediately turned her head and bared her teeth at Subai, but as the red catman approached, she felt death under pressure. She crawled at Subai's feet like a pet. Intuition told Subai that this Catwoman's intelligence was a bit unusual. Maybe it was because the forest was so big that there were all kinds of birds. With so many idiotic cat people, there would always be a few with higher IQs. Subai smiled and stepped forward. At this moment, the red cat man started sprinting and rushed over like a gust of wind. Subai's palm turned into a withered zombie palm. He turned sideways and his palm penetrated directly. The red catman's chest was then lifted up, crushing his internal organs, and then throwing its body to the ground. Catwoman took the initiative to pounce on the corpse and began to eat the corpse, while Subai wiped his hands with a tissue. Soon, a corpse was eaten to pieces by Catwoman alone. Her body immediately became much larger, taller than an adult woman, and the aura on her body became greater than that of the previous Catman. Subai leaned on his car and watched Catwoman slowly walking towards him. From her eyes, Subai could see the fierceness, struggle and fear. When she walked to Subai and slowly crawled down, a smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. Okay, those old guys are trying to figure out their moods, so I'm just going to play a little girl-raising game. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 260. Walking on the bloody road, Subai did not have any bad taste to get a dog chain to tie up Catwoman, but he walked in front and Catwoman walked behind, half a body behind Subai to show respect. As usual when walking dogs, people who keep pets also know this, that is, the authority of the owner must be established at home, and pets cannot be allowed to override your status, especially large dogs. This awareness must be cultivated from an early age, and pets will also start trying to provoke and challenge the master's authority. If the master cannot establish his own authority, he will have a headache in the future. Fortunately, this Catwoman is very smart. She is really not that stupid. In Subai's opinion, she is even a little too smart. Subai also knows that he is playing with fire. Originally, according to the direction of the plot, there will be very few cat people left in the city in the end, but their strength is extremely terrifying. In the end, those who did not board Noah's Ark will suffer this kind of destruction. In fact, Subai felt that the reason why Yan Hui, Hong Lanlin, and others were thrown into the story world by Terror Broadcast was because Terror Broadcast thought that they were the last step to complete this world destruction. The scene of world destruction is the opportunity given to them to complete the final, most dangerous and difficult finishing work, and it is also the price they need to pay. And myself. What are you doing now? Just for fun? Just for fun? Subai couldn't help but raise his head and look at the sky. With the naked eye, he couldn't see Noah's Ark in the sky, but Subai was sure that it was floating above, on, and off the boat, in two worlds. Seeing that Subai suddenly stopped, Catwoman hurriedly squatted down half a meter behind Subai. Although she was still in human form, most of her habits were cat instincts. Her sitting, walking, etc. were no different from those of a cat. Ahead, a group of ordinary cat people appeared after signing. They were a little confused, a little hesitant, and maybe deeply irritable. They were attracted by the breath of the red cat people and turned into cat people, but they unable to find the exact location of the red cat man. At this moment, when their eyes fell on the red cat woman behind Subai, the faces of about 20 or so cat men all showed a touch of greed and fanaticism. More than 20 cat people rushed towards the side, and their posture really looked a bit like Dead Rising, a cat version of Dead Rising. It was very interesting and interesting. However, in Sudbai's eyes, all this is just a very ridiculous stage play. Some people are watching, some are comprehending, and some are playing, while the tens of millions of creatures here have a grey background, and their blood and severed finger remains brew the most fascinating melody. Not a red cat person, just an ordinary cat person, of little value. Sudbai stretched out his hand and grabbed the back of Catwoman's neck, then rushed directly to the building on one side, grabbing Catwoman with one hand, but with the other hand, Sudbai continued to snatch and lift her at an extremely fast speed. Crawling on the outer wall of the building, the cat people also began to climb the wall, but their speed was indeed much slower than Sudbai. After being gradually pulled away by Sudbai for a long distance, they began to give up the pursuit. The useless pursuers behind him disappeared, and Sudbai also subconsciously slowed down his speed. However, just when Sudbai climbed to the wall of the 13th floor of the building, the glass suddenly shattered. A very thin but extremely agile and strong red male cat man leaped out directly, its sharp claws digging towards Sudbai's chest and heart. Presumptuous! Sudbai shouted low and grabbed the opponent's paw with one hand. The two hands collided in an instant. Sudbai's palm withered and turned into a zombie's palm. However, in the instant of collision, his palm shook, and Sudbai felt a wave of shock. Baidu felt a little surprised that the breath of breast cutting kept penetrating his palms back and forth, causing Sudbai to lose consciousness of his palms almost instantly. This cat person did it on purpose. Sudbai's eyes condensed, and a layer of ice condensed in front of him, and at the same time it spread behind the opponent, blocking the red catman's front and back paths directly in the air. However, the red catman suddenly raised his head, with a cunning look on his face. He spread his arms, and behind his back, a pair of blood-colored wings grew out. His speed suddenly increased, and he directly passed through Sudbai's ice defense, and once again get close to Sudbai. He actually knows how to hide his clumsiness. Sudbai threw Catwoman in his hand and threw it towards the side of the building. Catwoman broke the glass and rolled in. Then, Sudbai let go completely. If you dare to challenge me, then be mentally prepared to become my pet food. The red catman's nails became very exaggerated, and they were like a pair of daggers, cutting directly towards Sudbai. Sudbai's body exploded in the air and turned into a pool of blood. The blood spread out and the red catman's attack was completely invisible. At the same time, when the red catman passed through his body, the blood flowed out at an extremely fast speed. Sudbai, who had condensed and recondensed his body, was exactly 1 meter behind the red catman, with everything under control just right. The beasts are so deceitful that they only increase their laughter. A smile appeared on Sudbai's lips, and he grabbed the catman's wings with both hands, then spread them horizontally and tore them apart. Hiss! This pair of wings was directly uprooted by Sudbai, and blood spattered. The catman let out a howl, and his breath became sluggish. Then, Sudbai stepped on the other person's shoulder and stomped down hard. Whoosh! Sudbai's kick contained terrifying power and showed no mercy. Therefore, the catman fell vertically like an arrow from the string. With such a huge potential energy at such a high altitude, the catman directly fell on the hard ground. A human-shaped pit was dug into the road. One hand grabbed the railing on one side. Then, Sudbai rubbed his palm against the wall and slowly fell down. After landing, Sudbai put his palm into his cuff. This hand should be miserable now. It's hard to see, but it only takes a moment to restore it to the original state. Just when Subai just landed, Catwoman on the other side actually grabbed the wall and fell down. She landed a little reluctantly and hastily. Her body kept colliding with railings and other debris, but she successfully offset them before landing. The momentum on his body only still became a little scarred. Immediately afterwards, Catwoman almost couldn't wait and pounced directly on the Catman who was still lying there on the road. This Catman is not dead yet, but it is about to die. Subai used the most primitive and violent method to tear off its wings, and then smashed them down at such a high speed from such a high position. It's already a big miracle that he's not dead yet. As for if he still wants to do more troubles, that's a bit fanciful. Catwoman began to devour the Catman's body, doing so happily. Blood kept splashing out like a water pump, which made Subai feel a little surprised. As she ate Catwoman's body, she also began to change continuously. Has become taller than before, and the bones and muscles have become clearer. Even Catwoman's back is vaguely bulging. Could it be that even wings can be inherited by devouring them? Subai touched the tip of his nose. Isn't this method of swallowing the most primitive and most wasteful mode in terms of transmission efficiency? Why is it possible to achieve an almost perfect over-inheritance here? Is it because horror broadcasts specially opened a bug for the sake of storytelling, or is there some deeper reason? This point couldn't help but make Subai think deeply. Subai even thought, could he also try to eat it? Anyway, I have eaten a lot of miscellaneous and unimaginable things along the way, and this time is no different. I just don't know if there will be any side effects. While Subai was lost in thought, the Catwoman over there finally finished eating. God knows why these cat people had such a good appetite when they devoured the corpses of their companions. Could it be that the corpses of these companions were so good that they melted in the mouth? Subai couldn't help but swallowed. If reason hadn't told him that he was not a cat person and there was no use in eating these red corpses, he might have really couldn't help but eat them. If it didn't work, he would get a corpse and cut it up. Make a grill out of the most tender parts. In fact, if it is really useful, Lanlin and Yan Huiyong probably won't realize anything, and they will definitely be the first to eat it. After finishing her meal, Catwoman stretched out her arms and stood up. Her original clothes had broken because they were too small, so at this time, Catwoman was actually almost completely naked. Meow. A sharp cry came, Catwoman's back broke, and a pair of wings really grew out. Subai looked up and down and clapped his hands. Yes, it looks pretty. If you bleach the skin, it will be even more perfect, my Angela. Who knows, Catwoman actually turned around and roared ferociously at Subai. Oh, Subai nodded, then took out the Hellfire shotgun, and the muzzles of the two guns collided slightly. Catwoman's face showed a look of struggle and hesitation. In fact, she was obviously able to sense the power of the Hellfire shotgun, and her intelligence would increase every time she devoured the corpse of her red companion. However, her increasingly violent temper as her strength grew also made her very unwilling to continue to surrender to Subai. However, in the end, Catwoman slowly lowered her head and reluctantly knelt down in front of Subai. This figure is beyond words. Subai didn't care at all about the other party's increasingly obvious backlash against his master. Instead, he was more focused on Catwoman's hot figure. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 261. A Catwoman type, if placed in the real world, would definitely cause a sensation among people with that kind of preference. This figure is simply enough to make people's blood flow, and the embellishment of the pair of wings. After all, in the real world, it is so good there are quite a few people in this mouth. Of course, young Master Su is an exception. He is not very interested in having a one-night stand with this Catwoman here. After all, this Catwoman is currently crawling in front of him, and she is just afraid of her own power. But he is not really convinced by himself. Besides, beasts are beasts. It is difficult for even an ordinary person to develop a pure friendship with his slave master in such a short period of time. Subai stepped forward, stretched out his hand, and held Catwoman's chin. Catwoman's chin still had strong-smelling blood. Subai shook his head, and then pressed Catwoman's shoulders with slight force. Catwoman resisted subconsciously, and Subai was a little surprised by the force. By devouring the rest of the high-level Red Cat people, the speed of progress and growth in strength is really staggering. Subai suddenly looked forward to it. When the Catman who devoured the entire city appeared at the last moment, could Lanlin and the three of them really deal with it so easily? Catwoman stuck out her tongue and licked the palm of Subai's hand. Then she looked at Subai with charming eyes and a sense of enchantment. Then, she took the initiative to put her face on the back of Subai's palm. Rubbing together, it was very intimate. Subai smiled slightly. A backhand slap. Snapped. Catwoman was knocked to the ground, blood spilled from the corner of her mouth, but this time the blood was her own. Lying on the ground, she looked very shocked. She didn't know what she had done wrong. "Don't do this to me anymore." Subai squatted down next to Catwoman, reached out and patted Catwoman's cheek slightly. "The more you act like this, the more you keep doing it. Remind me how much you hate me in your heart, how much you even look down on me, to the point where you want to kill me. I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. I'm playing a game that could set me on fire at any moment. I enjoy this excitement emotionally, but my rationality keeps telling me that killing you is the safest thing." Catwoman looked at Subai tremblingly, lying on the ground, motionless. "Look. In fact, you are really beautiful, even if you have turned into a beast now." As he said that, Subai took off the earring from his left ear, and then took the initiative to nail it on Catwoman's left ear. This time, Catwoman really didn't dare to resist. After looking at it, Subai smiled with satisfaction. "Yes, a hot body paired with cool jewelry is a perfect match." Subai then took off the jewelry hanging around his neck and held it with his palm. He pressed it against Catwoman's chest. It was not hung around Catwoman's neck, but just pressed against Catwoman's warm and slippery chest. Subai's nails dug lightly. Catwoman's body trembled, but she still suppressed her ferocity. Let Subai do it, because she understands that no matter what Subai does to her now, it will be better than being killed now. She still needs to be strong, and she still needs to follow this human to devour other similar people. After a while, swallow it twice more. That's it, that's enough. When the time comes, this filthy human who tramples on and despises him will be torn into pieces by himself. Even if eating his flesh does no good to him, he will eat him without any leftover. Subai's index fingernail pierced a deep wound on Catwoman's chest. At the same time, the zombie's toxin also rotted the flesh in this area. "Oh, the meat is rotten," Subai said in surprise, and then calmly picked up a piece of glass next to him. "Relax your muscles and I'll scrape the poison for you." A little bit of rotten flesh was scraped off, and the heart was even visible in Subai's sight. Subai put the pendant directly in, and then placed his palm on the wound. The cold air was released, and the wound was directly frozen. It stayed and had the effect of bandaging. "It's done." Subai clapped his hands and stood up. "It's pretty good." Catwoman staggered and covered her chest with both hands. She wanted to stand up but failed. She felt that her heart was very cold for an instant, as if countless ice needles were pricking her. "Did I wake you up?" Subai put his mouth to Catwoman's earlobe. Catwoman knelt on the ground, looked at Subai, and prayed. "Don't be in a hurry, kneel down for a while, it will take a long time to remember." Subai raised his head and looked around. Obviously, it is much quieter than before. Now the population of the entire city has quickly dropped to an astonishing number. "That's almost it," Lanlin murmured while looking at her reflection in the blood lake. The bloody lake behind her showed a strange beauty. I've almost finished my wine. Yan Huiyang looked at the pile of severed finger remains downstairs and drank the last bit of wine. Pilo picked up his Pixio and said, "My Pixio is tired too." The three people had spent almost the whole day thinking about it. This was a rare opportunity that they could not ask for. They did not miss it and cherished it. However, they also kept their heads clear. The destruction of the world had entered the final stage, and it was indeed time for them to do something. "By the way, is there another person in our team?" Piaolu suddenly asked. "Is he dead?" "At this stage, he has not yet reached his survival limit," Lan Lin said, and then said, "Let's do what we should do first. As for him, let him do whatever he wants." Yan Huiyang suddenly looked up at the sky and said with a touch of ridicule, "Noah's Ark is right above our heads." "It's above our heads, but not on the same plane. We are no longer on the same mission line as those who were already on Noah's Ark, so we will naturally be separated. If we want to break this barrier, even if it is for us, it is also impossible. Horror broadcasts in the story world are freer, more casual, and scarier than horror broadcasts in the real world. Lan Lin, you are the smartest. Guess what they are doing on the main line? I don't believe they were just drinking red wine and eating barbecue while watching the Sea of Clouds and chatting on Noah's Ark." Pei Lu rarely agreed with Yan Huiyang. "I think so too. I felt from the beginning that Noah's Ark was definitely not as beautiful as I imagined." Su Qing stood on the deck, one of her feet was nailed. Next to her, there was a painting. In the painting, it was a baby, but this baby was not the baby doing the task in the story world, but Su Qing herself. The child who was aborted. In fact, Su Qing did not tell Su Bai the truth at the beginning. In fact, her child was not an accidental miscarriage, but was aborted on her own initiative. Next to Su Qing, there was a row of people, all of whom had a part of their body nailed to the deck. The sun was very dazzling, with a sense of judgment and a burning scorch. Of course, there are a few people who are slightly better. They are not nailed, but they are just standing on the deck, enduring the scorching heat of the sun. Everyone has sins. From the moment you get on Noah's Ark, you are saying goodbye to the past and preparing to welcome the new life. On the other side where the ship is about to arrive is a brand new world. There. Ethereal. Pure. There is no dust, which makes people yearn for and fascinate. Therefore, you must wash away the dirt on your body, clean your body, and at the same time clean your soul. I want to take you who are pious and you who are innocent to welcome the new world given to us by God." Adam's whole body was floating in the air. Below, there was a huge ship. On the deck, there were various animals and people. Among the people, the audience was naturally included. All creatures are repenting and atone for their sins. They are all suffering from the pain deep in their hearts. At the same time, this kind of suffering will also appear on one's own body, such as punishment nails, such as burning, such as cutting with knives and axes, etc. There were many corpses left on the deck. There are those who are rare birds and animals, and there are those who are listeners. Their death was extremely miserable, and even the physical suffering was secondary. What was even more terrifying was the inner pain. There was no way to eliminate the inner pain, and there was no way to eliminate it at all. Instead, they would be immersed in the same situation again and again. Go through it. Next to Liao Qiu, stood Yi Mole, a blind archer. Beads of sweat kept dripping down. Liao Qiu didn't know how long he could hold on. He was a very smart person, so he quickly understood the key. This was a test of the soul. "I can't hold on anymore." Liao Qiu's face showed pain. "It's almost over." Yi Molei's body was also a little shaky. "If I had known this, why would I come here?" Liao Qiu couldn't help but feel ridiculous. This kind of mission is considered a side mission. If you survive it, your state of mind can be strengthened, but if you can't survive it, your heart will perish first, and then your body will perish. It's better to stay down there and die easier. Ye Mole showed a wry smile. Being able to force Liao Qiu to say such words is enough to show how much pressure Liao Qiu is under. God is light. God is supreme. Therefore, we must follow God's steps and follow God's glory. Cleanse ourselves and become the most loyal supporters around God. Puff. Su Qing spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground slumped. There was a gaping hole in her lower abdomen. It's just like cesarean section scar. Because of the miscarriage, she did not receive this knife. Now, on Noah's Ark, she made up for it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 262. I fight and struggle with my heart every day, but this sage-like Adam was directly set up as a bug by the terrorist broadcast on Noah's Ark. Can't beat, just can't win. Every day I can only hear the constant nonsense here, and I have to repent, and I have to repent devoutly. This feeling is not that I am a dog, but that I am being suppressed by a dog. Blind man, I am really afraid that if I leave the story world alive, I will not be able to help but smash the church when I return to the real world. With deep love comes deep responsibility. Ye Mole stretched out his hand and gently wiped away the sweat on his neck. If the residual poison of being brainwashed is too deep, you may really believe in God after you go back. I am a party member. Liao Qiu took a deep breath. Actually, you have an advantage over me here. Liao Qiu is telling the truth. No matter how smart an ordinary person is, he is still more dependent on or more accustomed to seeing the world with his own eyes, and his inner touch and development are actually very little. The blind man is different. He cannot see with both eyes, so he has more time and opportunities to think quietly. Therefore, his heart is often stronger than that of ordinary people, especially Yimere. Actually, I can't hold on anymore. Ye Mole I turned his head and faced Liao Qiu. I have to go through the scene where I blinded myself many times every day. Do you feel good about it? You also have a strong taste and blinded yourself. I've only heard that people who want to practice the skill must commit suicide first. You shoot arrows and blind yourself. Why are you so extreme? To live. Ye Mole I said solemnly. That's right. Liao Qiu put away his playful smile and said seriously, do you think those who didn't get on the boat are really destined to die? Ye Mole was silent for a while and shook his head. It's impossible to die. Horror broadcasters don't like gameplay that leaves no life at all. Liao Qiu nodded, and then his body trembled. A circle of light appeared in front of him, and the light circle began to envelope him. Liao Qiu knew that he would experience the previous painful experience again. A ball of white light also appeared next to Ye Mole. About a quarter of an hour later, Liao Qiu knelt on the ground covered in sweat. Marks began to appear on his face and chest. They were special symbols, not runes, but symbols of a church organization in the real world. Liao Qiu gritted his teeth, but the more he did this, the more his body trembled. Then, those symbols began to hit him again, like a soldering iron, giving him the smell of barbecue. At the same time, the skin began to crack, and every opening was so horrific. Blood gurgled out of Ye Mole's eyes, and he knelt on the ground. A nail was pierced from the back of his head, nailing him to the deck. However, this kind of nail would not be fatal. However, this feeling will be uncomfortable, which proves that you can no longer stick to your heart and start to be unable to extricate yourself during the washing process. Oh shit! A nail appeared behind Liao Qiu, seemingly intending to nail Liao Qiu to the deck from his back. Liao Qiu let out a roar in his throat, put his hands on his face and chest, and tore off the flesh with the symbols on his body with his own hands. Blood dripped and the flesh and blood were separated. Roll. The flesh and skin were thrown aside by Liao Qiu, and at the same time, he lay on the ground due to severe pain. The nail that was about to be hammered slowly became nothing and then disappeared. Immediately afterwards, Liao Qiu's injuries recovered in an instant. There was no damage to his body, but the torment in his heart was extremely strange. Have no choice. It was time to rest for a while again. Liao Qiu raised his head and slowly sat down on the deck again. Rise. The blood in Yimoli's eyes began to recede, and the nails that had been nailed to his head gradually disappeared. Immediately, he sat up, his breath a little disordered. How many more times can I hold on? Liao Qiu asked. I don't know. Yimoli's voice was a little weak. Take another breath. I have calculated that less than 1/5 of the listeners on the deck died. The proportion of deaths that is acceptable and desirable for horror broadcasts should be 1/3. We don't need to think about it. To be honest, if you really want to hold on until the end of the world, you just need to hold on and die a little later than others. The city has become obviously deserted. Although there are people everywhere, they are all dead. The severed limbs and remains that can be seen everywhere have become the only decoration of the city now. Catwoman is here, constantly exuding scent, attracting other cat people to come over. However, the several waves of cat people who came during this period are no match for the current Catwoman, and Subai does not need to take action. Catwoman rushed over and tore them apart. Of course, she ate all the red cat people. Catwoman's progress is also obvious, and her aura is getting stronger and stronger, but the more this happens, the more docile she becomes to Subai, as if she has really been trained by Subai. In front of it is a small square with a sculpture that looks like blind Abing. In the sculpture, there is a catman leaning on the sculpture, seeming to be taking a nap or dozing off. The skin of this catman is red, but the clothes on his body are obviously newly matched. He is a young man about 17 or 8 years old, wearing jeans and a real gun on his waist. It has a strong retro feel. Catwoman subconsciously wanted to pounce, but Subai stepped on her tail. She didn't dare to resist Subai, so she could only curl up her body and crawl down beside Subai, pretending to be following Subai's lead. Isn't this IQ a little too high? Have cat people of this level appeared? Lanlin and the others are still there watching the show. Subai frowned slightly. In a daze, Subai felt that something had actually changed. The feeling of entering another turning point. Immediately afterwards, the cowboy seemed to have noticed Subai. He turned his head, his face still had a cat face, but both his expression and movements showed a kind of humanity. Moreover, when he looked at the Catwoman beside Subai, there was no greed in his eyes, but just a touch of joy, which was the joy of seeing the same kind. The other party came here slowly, very slowly, but Subai's pupils shrank. He could clearly feel that the other party was constantly searching for opportunities and breakthroughs. If the other party accelerated, he could in an instant, he broke through all obstacles and appeared directly in front of Subai to attack. Subai loosened his wrist and took a few steps forward. Ahead, the catman in cowboy clothing suddenly stopped and looked at the air to one side with a look of unwillingness. Then he tore off his clothes and started running away like a wild beast. On his face, there was written full of deep reluctance. Catwoman seemed to sense something at this time, raised her head, looked around, then looked at Subai's back, and then slowly crawled down. Subai walked over and picked up the clothes that had been deliberately torn into pieces. There was actually the smell of perfume on them. You have fully acquired human wisdom and can even taste and appreciate the smell of perfume. However, why do you still deliberately avoid it, and it seems that you still have to deliberately pretend to be an untamed beast? Subai asked himself in his heart. Then, he turned his head and looked at Catwoman. She probably hasn't reached that level yet, her wisdom hasn't reached that level. And those cat people who have reached that level of intelligence and strength are deliberately pretending to be crazy and acting stupid? Who to sell to? In view of the scene where he was directly ignored before, Subai knew that the other party was not selling it to him, otherwise he could have tried to kill him. A ray of blue light fell from the sky, and then the blue light dissipated like a firefly, and Lanlin, who descended like a goddess, walked out. "Your name is Subai, right?" Subai smiled and nodded. "I'm hungry," Lanlin said, very concisely. "What do you want to eat?" Subai asked. "Whatever, it's best, keep it light. I've seen too many uncomfortable things today and I don't really want to eat meat." "I see. Let's have dinner here at 8 o'clock in the evening. There is a shopping mall in front. Everything you need should be ready there." Seeing Subai's good attitude, Lanlin nodded, then pointed at Catwoman who was huddled behind Subai. "Your taste is very unique." Obviously, what Lanlin saw was Catwoman's hot figure. Catwoman was glanced at by Lanlin, and her whole body immediately pressed to the ground, not daring to move. Catwoman felt the terror of this woman very deeply, and her eyes fell, like a thunderbolt. "It's just for fun," Subai joked. "Don't delay, just cook." Lanlin turned around, seemingly ready to leave here to do something first, but she seemed to have thought of something again, turned around, looked at Subai, and pointed. "Catwoman, Subai, do you want to kill me now as if your pet wants to kill you?" "A bit," Subai replied with a smile. Lanlin also had a smile on her face. "I welcome you to make some attempts. I can't bear the calm life now. I'll tell you if you will be raped." Subai still kept smiling and continued to smile, because at this time, other expressions other than smile seemed inappropriate. Lanlin looked down. A man would only say such things to a woman he can't reach when he is angry. After finishing speaking, a ball of blue light condensed around Lanlin's body, and her whole body floated away. Subai squatted down, and Catwoman finally got up the courage to get up. "You always have to have dreams," Subai said to himself. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 263. Lanlin left. She seemed to have come here just to tell Subai not to forget to prepare dinner. Perhaps the reason why Lanlin had such an indifferent attitude before was because she simply thought Subai felt good about cooking. Good. A barbecue can make a boss of this level look at him with admiration and take care of him. At least, Subai will not take it for granted so naively. He has also been very clear about his position in the team from the beginning. I'm so angry, but I have to keep smiling." Catwoman stood up and started combing her hair. Subai looked at Catwoman behind him, and then started to walk. Catwoman immediately followed. After entering the supermarket, Subai deliberately stopped at some women's products. At the same time, he subconsciously observed and found that Catwoman was really, there is some lingering here. What kind of contact or communication did the Catman who wore cowboy clothing have with Catwoman? And he didn't even notice that he was between them. Subai didn't believe that the guy really just happened to be taking a nap there and then ran away after sensing Lanlin's aura. Things are not that simple, nor are they that pure. After taking some things and dishes, Subai pushed the shopping cart directly out. At this time, there was no need to queue up to check out. When he arrived at the door, Subai put the shopping cart aside, turned around, and looked at Catwoman behind him. Catwoman was a little dazed. When Subai looked at herself like this, she felt a coldness emanating from deep inside her heart. "Let's go," Subai said, "you have been released." Catwoman squatted on the spot, not moving, with a confused expression. "I know you understand what I'm saying. If you don't leave, then you'll die. I'm not interested in keeping any more pets. I'm scared." Catwoman turned around tentatively, took a few steps, and then ran away quickly. Subai pushed the shopping cart and entered a ramen restaurant opposite. This restaurant was relatively clean. There were no corpses and no need to clean. Wearing an apron, Subai started cooking inside. In fact, Subai didn't think his cooking skills were very good. At most, he was good at some barbecue and lighter stir-fries, so the dishes he cooked this time were also very simple. There were 7 dishes and 1 soup in total. Subai put several small tables together into one big table and put all the food on it. Subai took off his apron and went to the sink to wash his hands. Immediately, he stood at the door and lit a cigarette. Soon, not far away, Pilala walked slowly with Pixio in hand. He walked directly in without even looking at Subai, and then sat down at the dining table. Then, it was Yan Huiyang. Probably because of what Lan Lin said, Yan Huiyang now felt more fearful towards Subai. He just nodded slightly to Subai, and then walked in. The last person to come in was Lan Lin. Lan Lin walked in without even looking at Subai, stood behind the door, glanced at the dining table, and said, "Go get some beer." Okay, Subai immediately went to the convenience store next door to pick up a box of beer and brought it in. The 3 of them were already eating elegantly. After unpacking the beer and placing a can in front of everyone, Subai prepared the tissues and walked out of the restaurant again. This time, he did not stay in the restaurant but walked away. At the dinner table, Lan Lin ate her meal in small bites. She was not very satisfied with the meal, but she didn't dislike it either. It seemed that she had overestimated that person's cooking skills. Maybe he was only there on that occasion. The atmosphere is more suitable for barbecue, but it is really a bit disappointing to use it as a home chef in the story world. Yan Huiyang had a good appetite, but Pilalu didn't eat much, just drank some soup. Before tonight, we have to start doing some cleanup. Now the number of red cat people in the city is very small. Let's take action now to remove some of them from the food chain. This should be able to avoid the kind of complete disaster in the future. The emergence of fusion, Piaolu said while drinking soup. We must also pay attention to disposing of the corpses, even the blood. Even if we designate a location specifically for burying the corpses, and have a person specifically guarded, this can prevent the corpses that have not had time to be disposed of from being destroyed by the rest. Cat people are eaten. If this is the case, it will reduce our work efficiency. Their corpses are somewhat special. I have tried it. It is a bit unrealistic to evaporate it completely by force. We cannot afford this kind of consumption. Yan Huiyang stood up. Served himself another bowl of rice. Corpse guard, Piaolu smiled, who's going? Is it you, Master Yan, me, or should I let Lan Lin do it? Yan returned to Hongsheng and sat down after eating. There are 4 people in our team. Pilu nodded, that's all. That's good for that kid. Lao Yan, I haven't heard you talk about your cause and effect all day. I really miss you. Why don't you talk to me about your waste again? Yan Huiyang glanced at Pilalu. If you want to have internal strife, just say so. If I turn against you now, the worst we can do is play together. Lan Lin put down the bowl and chopsticks at this time, glanced at Yan Huiyang and Piaolu, and said seriously. Even if I am the only one, the situation will not be completely out of control, because I will kill all of you before the situation gets out of control, and then according to the aesthetics of horror broadcasting, I will never let everyone die in such a big place. From a story scene. The dinner table fell into silence because of Lan Lin's words. Pei Lu stretched out his hand and pinched Pai Xiu's head, while Yan Huiyang kept his head down and continued eating. Lan Lin picked up a tissue and wiped her mouth. It's almost done. After eating, let's get ready to take action. Before the final result comes out, we must first consume at least 1/3 to 1/2 of the food chain. Lan Lin stood up and walked out. Starting so early, Piaolu said a little surprised. I'm going to give instructions to the chef guarding the body, Lan Lin replied without looking back. When she walked out of the restaurant, her eyes wandered around for a moment, then she raised her head and looked at the rooftop of the tall building in front of her. Do you feel that being a cook in the story world is an insult to yourself? Lan Lin's figure slowly fell down on the rooftop. Subai sat on the ground, with 2 cans of beer and 2 packs of cigarettes beside him. Is something wrong? Subai shook his cigarette ashes, turned around and looked at Lan Lin. The food is not very delicious, Lan Lin said. It's much worse than I expected. Subai nodded, that's about my level. After all, my profession is not a cook. Then what is your occupation? Build a house. Subai smiled and gestured to Lan Lin, building houses. I am particularly good at building small houses. I will build them very delicately when I return to reality. In this world, I will give each of you 3 a gift. Where's your pet? Lan Lin didn't mind Subai cursing herself with such words. In her eyes, this was just a very immature performance. Released, Subai said truthfully. Lan Lin nodded non-committally. Let me tell you something. Tell me. Subai threw the cigarette butt on the ground. Slave, listen. We are going to take care of some of the cat people tonight, and you will be responsible for taking care of the bodies. The corpse guardian in the story world. Subai stood up. Okay, I will do whatever you ask me to do. I hope you really understand. I really understand, Subai repeated. Lan Lin got close to Subai, reached out and touched Subai's face gently. Actually, you should know what I am looking forward to. I know. Of course Subai knew, and Lan Lin had told herself before that this woman might really have a disharmonious sex life and extreme lack of stimulation, so she also hoped for stimulation in the story world. She was really telling herself, come up with something quickly, she lacks freshness and excitement. Damn, he's more mentally ill than me. The place where the corpses are piled up is in that square. You still have a partner. Isn't it because you want to stay with me? Subai asked. What do you think? Okay, I'll go down after I finish my beer. About half an hour later, Subai returned to the small square. There was no one in the square, except for a brave animal lying there. When he saw Subai coming over, he opened his eyes for a moment and then closed them. Late at night. The actions of Lan Lin and the other 2 people also started. At first, almost every 10 minutes, one of the 3 people came back carrying the body and dumped it here. After that, the gap began to become longer and longer. After 10 minutes, it became a quarter of an hour, and then it became half an hour. Subai squatted here with this Pixiu, guarding the corpses here. Several red cat people tried to get close, but they were all torn apart by Pixiu and turned into new corpses and dumped here. Moreover, Subai noticed that Lan Lin and the others did not attack ordinary red cat people. The targets they found were all very powerful red cat people. Obviously, they were closing the net conditionally, not taking all. After finishing another cigarette, Subai touched his pocket and found that there was no more cigarettes. Pixiu was still squatting next to Subai. Subai was also a little shocked by its huge and fierce appearance when it transformed. The nails scratched his arm, and Subai's blood began to flow out, flowing in front of Pixiu. Pixiu immediately opened his eyes, couldn't help but stick out his tongue and started to him. It was cruel and bloodthirsty by nature, which was also its instinct. Subai didn't dare to kill him because he was his master's teammate. Kill him. His master would be angry, but he took the initiative to bleed himself, and if he didn't drink it, he wouldn't drink it. Furthermore, as a vampire of not a low level, the energy and nutrients contained in Subai's blood were absolutely amazing. These Catman corpses are only useful if the Catman devours them. Ordinary people, including this Pixiu, are of no use at all if they eat them. Subai squeezed his arm with his hand to speed up the flow of blood. Watching Pixiu greedily licking his own blood. The corners of Subai's mouth slowly curved. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 264. Subai's face began to become paler and paler, and his lips gradually became chapped. However, something called excitement kept flashing in his eyes, and it became more and more intense. Finally, when Subai took a deep breath, covered his wound and stopped bleeding, Pixio looked at Subai with some lingering thoughts. A fierce light flashed in his eyes, as if he wanted to pounce on Subai, kill Subai and then eat Subai. It was completely true, but after all, it had an owner, and it knew clearly that it could not really kill Subai, so it just lay on the side motionless with some resentment. Subai sat down next to Pixio and put a hand on his chest. A layer of frost spread from Subai's eyebrows, and soon spread to Subai's limbs and bones. At this time, the whole person seemed to have turned into an ice sculpture. And Pixio's body seems to have been pulled by Subai. After all, Pixio just drank so much blood from Subai. The blood of the vampires is not so delicious, because their blood is equivalent to their own life, with ordinary sensing that biological blood does not possess. Frost began to condense on Pixio's body. However, at this moment, Pixio yawned, opened his mouth, and a buzz came from his body. The power of his blood began to spurt out, directly draining the blood power that belonged to Subai in his body and attempted to rebel. Crush and break into pieces. The frost on my body dissipated. Pixio glanced at Subai sitting in front of him, with a hint of ridicule in his eyes. Even though it was still a juvenile, it had the blood of a divine beast after all. It's really ridiculous that this stupid human being wants to use this method to take advantage of himself. However, Subai was still covered in frost, without any change. It seemed that he did not feel any decadence or disappointment because Pixio had perfectly suppressed his own power. Pixio was a little surprised when he saw Subai's expression entering the room, but he didn't bother to say anything. He just lay down and squinted his eyes to take a nap. However, when it had just dozed off and slept for a short time, it suddenly sensed a sign. This was a sense in the blood of the divine beast, similar to a human sixth sense. In front of him, Subai's ice sculpture was still an ice sculpture, but there was no one in the ice sculpture. Pixio stood up immediately. Looking around, he found no trace of Subai. However, soon, it raised its head and saw a group of black mist above itself, and it shrouded it at this time. Roar! Pixio let out a roar. It sensed Subai's aura from the black mist. What did this human being want to do? If it continued to challenge its own authority, it would no longer tolerate it because of its master. Subai, who turned into black mist, wrapped Pixio and began to actively absorb Pixio's vitality. Pixio was really offended. This human dared to rob him of his vitality. He immediately opened his mouth and let out a roar, and then began to rob Subai of his vitality. Subai was retreating steadily. Not only was he unable to absorb Pixio's vitality, but the blood in his own black mist was constantly being swallowed into his body by Pixio. The size of the black mist has not changed, but it is getting lighter and lighter. Pixio's eyes flash with a wanton and cruel light, and he continues to absorb it without any scruples, tirelessly. Finally, the black mist could no longer hold up, and Subai's body appeared. However, this body was shriveled and stiff, completely like a mummy, or a zombie. The blood in the body turned into blood and was all sucked into Pixio's belly. However, the expression on Subai's face remained unchanged. He just stretched out his hands and grabbed Pixio's mouth, pressing and holding it tightly so that he could not open his mouth. Immediately afterwards, Subai relied on the induction of his own blood in Pixio's body to completely vaporize the blood at this time, turning into an existence like blood mist and blood gas. For Subai, who could integrate himself into the blood flow, it is not very difficult to control these. Pixio's body began to swell. Pixio finally panicked. It finally got messed up. It seemed to understand that it had been tricked. Yes, it was indeed a trick. The blood at the beginning was just a foreshadowing, or a foreshadowing. The blood condensed the temptation that a being like Pixio, who tasted almost like a glutton, could not refuse. Moreover, it also felt that it had eaten the blood. It's not a big deal. In fact, it's really not a big deal. Even if it's the blood of a vampire, as long as the little Pixiu has half a day to digest it, it will have nothing to do with Subai. Later, Subai transformed into black mist and deliberately stimulated Pixiu to absorb its vitality, only to make Pixiu angry and start absorbing the blood mist, which was not very tasty or attractive to Pixiu. One is in liquid state and the other is in gaseous state, and the energy and nutrient concentration inside naturally increases day by day. If it were not to teach Subai a lesson or to deliberately fight back against Subai, Pixiu would not bother to swallow these blood mist. After swallowing the blood mist, Subai, who had almost lost most of the blood in his body, was able to continue to live in the state of zombie blood. This gave him time to induce the blood that Pixiu had sucked into his body at the beginning, and let the blood it also turned into a gaseous state. Come and go, the quality has not changed, but the space has doubled. Pixiu's body began to swell, like a balloon, round and round. In addition, his mouth was tightly pinched by Subai. It had to use most of its strength to suppress the chi and blood in the body while also controlling its own. If the body is not stretched, there will be no extra energy and strength to fight with Subai. The reason why Subai dared to do this, the reason why he used this method, and the reason why he thought it would be effective. Because he knows one thing clearly. That is Pixiu, there is no. In ancient times, people often used Pixiu as a name for the army. It has a mouth but no body, can swallow everything without releasing it, can attract wealth and accumulate treasures, can only go in but not out, and has special magical powers. It is said that Pixiu is the third prince of the Dragon King. Its staple food is gold, silver, and jewelry. Naturally, it is full of treasures. Compared with other auspicious animals, such as the three-legged toad, it has more heads. Therefore, it is deeply loved by the Jade Emperor and the Dragon King. However, eating if you take too much, you will have diarrhea, so one day you may defecate in the open because you can't help it, which made the Jade Emperor angry, so he slapped him with a slap on his buttocks, and his wife was sealed. From then on, gold, silver and jewelry could only be used can't get in or out. After this illusion spread, Pixiu was regarded as an auspicious beast that attracts wealth and treasures. Many Chinese people wear Pixiu jade products for this reason. A young Pixiu naturally does not have the attitude of swallowing up thousands of miles like a tiger. Subai has also observed in the past 2 days that every time Pilala feeds Pixiu, he feeds him his own essence and blood, twice a day, 1 drop at a time. I don't dare to feed Pixiu too much because it takes time to digest and it can't excrete. If it eats too much, it can only hold itself up. Vaporize. 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 Subai kept stimulating the blood in Pixiu's body, and Pixiu's body kept expanding and expanding again. In fact, even if Subai didn't grab its mouth, the blood mist controlled by Subai would it is also difficult to spit it out, because the blood mist has a spirit and can be stuck in Pixiu's body under Subai's control. These blood mist are not ownerless things. Cracks began to appear from Pixiu's body, and at the same time, golden blood began to drip out. These are the true blood of divine beasts, which are extremely precious. Subai has sucked many kinds of blood since he had the blood of the blood clan, but there is no a kind of blood that can compare with this, even if it is the blood of an ordinary strong man, cannot reach the level of a divine beast. However, Subai held back. At this time, it was the time for him and Pixiu to compete with each other. He could not mess up, and he did not dare to mess up. I'll kill you first, or at worst, I'll cripple you first. Then, I'll go and enjoy you again. No, the cat people we are hunting now are only 1/3 of the target we expected to kill, or even less than that. There must be something wrong somewhere. Yan Hui stood on a bridge and looked at the flood of rivers around him. The color turned red. There's something wrong. They seem to be avoiding us on purpose. Although I admit that they should have a certain degree of wisdom, I don't think their wisdom can reach this level, or even start a kind of teamwork. There must be a reason for this pattern, this large-scale concealment. Maybe we forgot something. Lanlin frowned slightly, showing especial flattery. We already attach great importance to them, but now it seems that we don't attach enough importance to them. Just as Pili was about to say something, a Pixio totem on his right arm suddenly became hot, his face suddenly changed, and he shouted, "There's something wrong with my Pixio." Yan Huiyong didn't glow too much this time. He naturally knew what a mythical beast, even if it was just a baby, meant to an audience. Not every audience had the opportunity to raise a beast that could be brought into and out of the story world of spiritual beasts. I remember that scary woman had a cat. I have to go back first, and you guys can continue the search. Pixio is Pililu's favorite, so naturally he can't let anything happen to him. However, at this moment, more than a dozen powerful auras erupted from the bottom of the river and from both sides of the bridge. Deep in the river, several cat people emerged, and at both ends of the bridge, two groups of cat people slowly emerged. Approaching. They wear clothes, and except for the fuzz and beards on their faces, they are almost the same as ordinary people. Lanlin gently touched her ring with her hand, and a hint of understanding appeared in her eyes. Actually, the story world has given clues at the beginning. There are some people in this city who can turn into cat people even if it is not a full moon night. They also know that they are cat people. Therefore, they may have known each other before the world was destroyed. There is an organization. After the destruction of the world begins, these cat people who have the calmness and wisdom of humans from the beginning will. Naturally, he became the biggest vested interest. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 265. Sometimes, some things don't actually require too many reasons or too much utilitarianism. It just depends on whether you want it or not. That's all. Therefore, in the real world, the biggest headache for the police is that this kind of purposeless crime has no motive that can be explained in ordinary sense. This is equivalent to directly cutting off the police's conventional investigation methods. For example, in a certain homicide case, the police will definitely first investigate people who have conflicts with the deceased, and also investigate nearby people with criminal records. Generally speaking, once the interests and motives are found, the case is basically solved. But if it is someone, such as a university professor or an ordinary student, who suddenly wants to kill someone on a whim, and then actually kills the person, and happens to avoid the camera and other evidence that clearly leaves direct traces, the difficulty of solving the case will instantly increase by many levels. Originally, Subai really planned to just follow those three people and get through the story, but sometimes, it seemed that it was difficult to be a normal person. Lanlin's hints again and again, the meaning is very simple, you must do something for me. Although I don't know what Lanlin's purpose is, and I don't know what kind of medicine Lanlin sells in the gourd. But being treated as a chef and a lackey, Subai naturally felt uncomfortable. If there was a chance, he wouldn't mind trying to gain wealth through risk again. Making trouble. Isn't that what young Master Su is good at? He did not regard Lanlin and the other two as his audience, but more as NPCs in the story world. If he wanted to gain as much benefit as he wanted, he would need to take as much risk as he wanted. Subai knew this very well. Pixio's body was dripping with blood. The situation in the fierce battle between it and Subai was actually very clear, but Pixio seemed to be persisting. It believed that its master would come back to save itself. But, unfortunately for it, but fortunately for Subai, its owner, Piaolu, hasn't come back yet. Originally, Subai felt that the time had exceeded expectations by a lot, but now it was still calm, so Subai was happy to relax and continue to bake slowly. Gradually, Pixio seemed to be unable to hold on any longer, especially since it knew that Pililu could definitely sense that something was going on his side but hadn't come back yet, and it was obviously desperate that the last straw would be destroyed. Subai saw a pleading look in Pixio's eyes, obviously planning to give up and begging for mercy. There is a big difference between a mythical beast and a pig, but in some cases, there is actually no difference. When encountering a butcher's knife, you will also be afraid when you are about to die. Subai took one hand away from Pixio's mouth and pierced Pixio's body with his nails. However, the scale defense on Pixio's body was extremely strong. Subai's nails drew a spark on its body but failed to penetrate at all. Subai didn't use brute force, just tapped it lightly with his fingers. In order to survive, Pixio took the initiative to let go of his body's defense, allowing Subai's nails to pierce his body. The golden blood flowed out, directly melting Subai's skin like red molten iron and blending into Subai's body. Subai felt as if his whole body was being forged in a furnace. He was in great pain, and his facial expression also changed. Twisted, but he still suppressed his silence and continued to introduce Pixio blood into his body. How many chances do you have to get the blood of a mythical beast? This time, you have to drink enough. Pixio's body shape continued to shrink with the loss of its own blood, but its belly became larger and larger, and its longing eyes became more intense, obviously with a strong desire to survive, and also reminded Subai that if this continues, it's really dead. Subai closed his eyes and began to pull the blood mist left in Pixio's body to dissipate and return to his own body. The blood swam around in Pixio's body and was tempered by Pixio. Then it returned to Subai's body and transformed. It became even more pure and clear, which meant that Subai suddenly used this Pixio as an air purifier. Instead of letting Pixio die like this, Subai stopped in advance. The energy and blood were absorbed back, and Pixio's belly returned to normal, but it was indeed several times smaller than before. It is estimated that the blood and essence of Pililu for several months was in vain. Pixio lay on the ground like a sick cat, his breath became very unstable, some brilliance began to flash on his body, and the appearance of his body was also undergoing some changes, as if it was becoming another look. Pixio is still very famous in China, and its stone carvings and murals can be seen everywhere, so Subai also knows what Pixio looks like in general. The guy who is changing his appearance now clearly does not look like Longzi. Immediately, a look of understanding appeared in Subai's eyes. It's not a pure-blooded Pixio, it's something that relies on acquired opportunities to cultivate the bloodline of Pixio. Subai sat down on the ground. The burning feeling in his body was still there, not abating at all. But after getting used to this feeling, he felt like a sauna, which was quite comfortable. This was a kind of morbid torture, and when it comes to sexual asphyxiation and S&M, it seems that Subai really has this very human hobby, because he has tried the first two and they feel pretty good. Reaching out and touching Pixio's head, Subai was hesitating whether to kill it. Originally, he just planned to draw some blood. Even if Piaolu knew about it and got angry, he wouldn't say that he would fight to the death, at least. There is still a little room for maneuver, but this Pixio is obviously a string. The bloodline has been changed by him, and it has directly fallen down the level of the divine beast. It is no different from killing it. Piaolu will not fight with him in the future. What a hell! Reaching out and touching the blue ring on his finger, Subai subconsciously stimulated it, then released it, and then stimulated it a few more times. He knew clearly that Catwoman should still be around here, not too much far away, because I inserted something from Frozen Man's set of jewelry into Catwoman's heart. If I stimulate one here, the rest there will also be induced. Catwoman should know this. Her life is still in his own hands. Almost 10 minutes later, a sharp cat meow came from behind Subai. Subai turned around and saw a clothed and winged Catwoman just above him. The breath has grown again, and I must have eaten a lot of good things secretly. Haha, I also learned how to dress and dress up. It's so pretty. Subai was not suppressed by Catwoman's aura, especially since he was clearly holding the opponent's lifeline. There was no need to foolishly think about competing in the aura showdown. He was really full. After hovering in the air for half a minute, Catwoman finally landed. When she stood in front of Subai, she hesitated for a few seconds, then leaned down and knelt down on one knee in front of Subai. But this reluctance, this unaccustomedness, this unwillingness are still very obvious and clear. Be good, that's why you are good. Behind him is a small mountain of corpses. It's mutated again, no, it's been strengthened again. A smile appeared on Subai's lips. Hiss. When cat people devour each other, they can devour the power in each other's flesh and blood, and at the same time, they can inherit some other things from each other. For example, Catwoman's wings are inherited from another cat person who was swallowed by her. This is really disgusting. Subai looked at the two cat heads and shook his head. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 266. Do you want to eat these? Subai turned around and pointed at the pile of corpses behind him. In the eyes of ordinary people, this pile of corpses is a dirty and scary thing, but in the eyes of cat people, it is like a sea. Luo Yin. Catwoman lowered her head and began to breathe quickly. Obviously, the meaning was obvious. For her, the pile in front of her was an irresistible temptation. If you want to eat, go ahead and eat. Subai sat down on the spot. Chi and blood were constantly rolling in his body, and the blood of Pixia was integrating into his limbs. The painful feeling that he was used to now found that it was affecting his state a little. For example, the body begins to become numb spontaneously. Obviously, just as it takes a while for Pixia to digest Subai's blood, it also takes a certain amount of time for Subai to completely convert Pixia's blood for his own use. Before the digestion is completed, Subai's body will always be in a state of side effects. Catwoman jumped up, rushed directly to the mountain of corpses, and began to desperately eat the corpses of the same kind. Looking at this scene, Subai was really envious from the bottom of his heart. Unfortunately, these corpses were of no use to Subai, otherwise how could he have taken advantage of her? While evolving while devouring, Catwoman's body began to gradually become smaller, and her body became more and more well-proportioned. The hot and plump figure before now began to gradually transform into a skinny figure. From an aesthetic point of view, it was the transition from one kind of beauty to another. Subai took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and watched this scene, wondering at what point the restriction in Catwoman's body would expire. Subai could not be absolutely blindly confident at any time. You can accept committing suicide by yourself, but you cannot accept committing suicide by stupidity. Meow. Catwoman devoured faster and faster. Her mouth was obviously small, but she spit out a stream of blue flames, directly vaporizing the remaining corpses in front of her. The vaporized smoke was completely sucked into her mouth. Inside. Immediately, Catwoman opened her arms, and the sound of bones breaking began to appear up and down her body. This was a sign that her life level had advanced a lot, and her body began to reorganize itself. Oh, pretend, keep pretending. Subai subconsciously stimulated his ring. Catwoman's face quickly showed pain, and she knelt on the ground, staring at Subai with a hint of resentment. You want to use the external manifestation of evolution to change the position of your heart to avoid what I left in your body. You are really persevering in order to be free, but don't challenge the limit of my tolerance again. Subai stood up and walked towards Catwoman. Meow. Catwoman let out a sharp roar, spread her wings, turned into a red lightning, and hit Subai directly. She pinched Sudbai's neck with one hand, moved forward, and then moved forward, directly pressing Sudbai against the sculpture. Above, and behind, there was a trace of a ravine of burning and incineration. This is just a manifestation of Catwoman's current leakage of power. Sudbai has indeed successfully cultivated a monster, but this monster does not think of itself as a pet at all. I have the courage to die together, do you? Sudbai looked at the Catwoman in front of him calmly. Not to mention that Sudbai's current physical condition was a bit unstable, which affected his combat effectiveness to a certain extent. Even when Sudbai's condition was stable, it might not be now. She has become Catwoman's rival. She has devoured the corpses of so many strong men of the same kind at once. God knows how many times she has evolved. After each evolution, her level of wisdom and so-called sense of dignity will rise again, and she wants to gain true the desire to be free from Sudbai's control over her would rise again. It seems that it has become this Catwoman's habit to challenge her master's authority after devouring the same kind of advancement. However, she is still afraid of death. Unless her wisdom evolves to the level of a saint, or goes to an extreme and becomes a lunatic like Sudbai, she will still take the initiative to be eaten to death by Sudbai. Some people are afraid of being stunned, some people are scared of their lives, that's generally it. Catwoman stared hard into Sudbai's eyes. From Sudbai's eyes, she could see no fear, only a terrifying calmness. Obviously, this human being could do what he said without any fear at all. Die with yourself under pressure. Finally, Catwoman's hand loosened. Sudbai fell down, leaned under the sculpture, and coughed a few times. This Catwoman now actually gave him the feeling of being beaten by Yan Huiyang. At least, from the perspective of physical strength, Catwoman's strength had improved to its almost approaching Yan Huiyang's level. Looking at his palm, Sudbai saw that the blood vessels on it were beginning to be dyed with a layer of dark gold. Apparently, his body was beginning to fuse and transform Pixio's blood, and it was already very effective. Protect me. Sudbai raised one hand. Catwoman froze on the spot, but finally reached out and grabbed Sudbai's hand to help him up. Oh, let me go. Now I really have no strength at all. I should have done it with you while I still had some strength. It's a shame. Sudbai continued to tease, he knew clearly that Catwoman could understand. Where? Catwoman asked. Whatever. Sudbai took a deep breath. Physical fatigue was coming over him quickly. Fortunately, he didn't have any mental side effects. Otherwise, once he fell into a coma and fell into a deep sleep, he wouldn't be able to handle the cat. Catwoman spread her wings, grabbed Sudbai and flew up. The swift and violent wind kept hitting Sudbai's face, but Sudbai felt a little happy. Soon, Catwoman disappeared. She took Sudbai to an apartment building and entered directly from the balcony. Is this your home? Sudbai was sitting by the bed. Coming in from the balcony was a bedroom. The main color of the bedroom was pink. It should be a little girl's room, very princess style. There was a photo frame on the bedside table. There was an artistic photo in the photo frame. Sudbai turned it over and saw a girl with a sweet smile. One hand reached over and pressed the frame back down. Sudbai smiled and said, "Has even the memory been restored?" Catwoman looked at Sudbai with murderous intent in her eyes. "Won't you pour a glass of water for the guest?" Sudbai asked. Catwoman left the bedroom, and after a while, she walked in with a can of Coke, and threw the Coke directly on the bed in front of Sudbai. Not minding that his slave was already rubbing his nose and face, Sudbai opened the drink, took a sip, then put his feet on the bed, pulled the pillow behind him, and lay down on it. Catwoman left the bedroom and sat in the living room. Both of them were very quiet at this time. Sudbai, who was lying on the bed, was constantly flashing with a faint golden light, and traces of blood continuously overflowed from the pores on his body, and then condensed into a layer of faint blood scab. Catwoman was sitting on the sofa, motionless, looking at the newly taken wedding photos of a middle-aged couple in the living room. Outside the window, red wind kept blowing in and blended into Catwoman's body. Catwoman's eyes became clearer and clearer, but she was unaware of it. Boom! The bridge collapsed. In the previous battle, the bridge was actually riddled with holes. In the end, after Yan Huiongdi pulled out a chain and blasted a Catman, it finally collapsed and could not hold up at all. Living. There were several wounds on Pai Lai Lu's body, dripping with blood, but his steps were still firm. He was actually better at protecting himself. In the battle just now, he was constantly changing the barrier, and he basically succeeded. The numerical advantage of those cat people was eliminated, but they were still successfully attacked by a cat person. Fortunately, it was not serious. Yan Huiyong and Lan Lin were the main force in the killing. In their hands, more than a dozen catmen were killed. The rest of the cat people were all killed in the battle, except for the last one, who was holding a gong and banging it from the beginning of the battle until now. He was watching his own kind die in battle one by one, and he was sending them off. The scene was very desolate. This catman is a bit old, and his face looks weathered. Even though he has a cat face now, he can still see a lot of things. Yan Huiyong appeared behind the catman, and smashed the catman's gong with one hand. The gong made a final crisp sound. Then, the catman did not resist, but looked back at Yan Hui with a strange smile. Hong, then his head was smashed by Yan Huiyong's palm, and his body fell to the ground. On the ground, all the corpses spontaneously ignited at this time, incinerating the blood and minced meat into ashes, but a faint and unpredictable red light shot into the air, and it was unknown where it would be blown by the wind. Piaolu tried to use the barrier to block it, but found that it was ineffective at all. "What is this?" Yan Huiyong asked with a slight frown. "The appearance of this thing means that we have done a useless job." Lan Lin squatted down by the river and began to wash her hands with the river water. There is a movie starring Jet Li, called Cosmic Wanted, and the world in the film is there are 125 parallel layers in total. If you travel to other layers and kill the corresponding self, you can absorb that person's power. Now, the situation is almost exactly the same as what we are encountering now. We tried to weaken the strength of the catman who appeared last by killing some of them first, but the horror broadcast obviously did not want to see us so relaxed, so we specially set up such a node. Now, we kill a catman, that catman's the power will dissipate with the wind and transfer into the living cat body. I want to go back first. Pilalo's figure disappeared on the spot, and he sensed the danger of his own Pixiu. Lan Lin and Yan Huiyong were still standing by the river. Yan Huiyong walked behind Lan Lin. Lan Lin felt something. "What's wrong? You don't think Piaolu will doubt you? Do you suspect that I deliberately arranged for Subai to stay with his pet?" "Lan Lin, what on earth are you going to do? Is it just for fun?" Yan Huiyong said in confusion. Lan Lin blinked, then opened her mouth slightly, revealing two charming fangs. "Old Yan, you and I met first, and then we met Pai Lai Lu. He doesn't know, but you should know what my hidden bloodline is. I am currently raising an attractive and delicious little quail.